The story of how It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia came to be began long before its three creators, Rob McElhenney, Glenn Howerton, and Charlie Day, ever met. While all of them were actors living in New York enjoying varying degrees of success, Charlie had been making a living after graduating college in 1998 working a number of small roles on AMC's independent film channel.
Escape from Hollywood, every Sunday on IFC.
Among other gigs such as a guest spot in Law & Order in 2001.
Talk about Wes, huh?
Yeah, we gather he wasn't particularly popular.
Yeah, people made varying degrees of accommodation for his behavior.
Well, let's talk about you specifically.
All while waiting tables on the side. It was when he was working sporadically on episodes of Third Watch and getting picked up for a role on Louie in 2003 that he began stretching his creative muscles by working on bizarre homemade short films with some familiar faces he had met at Merrimack College, like David Hornsby, Nate Mooney, Logan Marshall Green, and Jimmy Simpson, whom he lived with at the time.
Charlie, you seen my cigarettes?
These short films are an extremely interesting watch. I've picked out a small selection consisting of Killer Apartment, Quit Smoking, and Beer, but there were dozens of these things made. The first thing that stood out to me was the ambition Charlie and Jimmy displayed for these projects that were never really meant to see the light of day. They were only unearthed several years after the fact on Jimmy's YouTube channel, but the shaky camera work takes the direction of interesting cinematography over just capturing story on film, such as in this shot of Charlie and the cigarette packet through a glass table, or the uneasy canted angles in the hallway. Similarly, the editing can be wild and out there. Using Quit Smoking as an example again, the idea of addiction is visualized with this sickly green tint, and manic, you wouldn't download a car-esque editing. This is a visual style that Charlie still prefers to this day. It would not surprise me if, based on this discussion in 2020...
Let's go back to the show being 4:3 versus 16:9.
I think it looks better before.
Okay. So what you wanted to do, just so the audience knows, someone came to us and said, "Hey,
I remember
the world is changing.
I remember this.
Your television show is in 4:3.
I remember we went into a room. We went into a room.
And Charlie was saying, "No, the show must be this aspect ratio." And we were going,
I think it would be rad if the show was still in 4:3.
I think.
But
and standard definition.
I'm
Also, which is what you
Yes,
fought for.
yeah.
You were saying the show should
I like
look
the grittier look to the
and the turn of the millennium short films, Charlie's visual style was a big driving force behind the grimy, dimly lit look of the early seasons. I absolutely love this sinister shot of a man through a peephole. Similar to Sunny, all of these short films are shot in very small, real places. This was obviously a limitation of just being an at-home short film at the time, but the humour of absurd situations taking place in very regular apartments and hallways is something that stuck with what became the network series of Sunny ever since. Another similarity I want to point out is the affinity for loud, screaming, overlapping dialogue that's been present from the very start. While two of these, Killer Apartment and Smoking, are presented more like silent films that revel in discomfort before having the tension broken by shock humour, violence, and gore, the other, Beer, feels a whole lot more like what Sunny became. It starts with an absurd conversation about an eye infection where the two characters refuse to let the other finish their line before starting their own.
She did borrow my turtle.
Well, she did.
She got an eye infection.
No.
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 It's just an eye. No. Eye? What else is there but eyes on a turtle? What else does a turtle have but no.
This is an absolute hallmark of Sunny, and in my opinion the thing that sets it apart from other sitcoms in mood more than anything else. Stupid characters insisting on doing things that aren't working is another thing that ends up defining a lot of Sunny's humour. And even more so, seeing characters completely overreact while a straight man quietly observes.
Where's my dustbuster? What's in the fridge? Nothing. Why?
The humour of absurd characters with no self-awareness in a rational world is something that comes up all the time, even more so in later seasons of Sunny. Think of the many the gang sits across a table scenes, or the sheer number of what is happening lines in the show. I think it's interesting that this seed was planted so early on, even before it really bloomed in the network series. These short films are well worth a watch on Jimmy Simpson's YouTube channel, if nothing else than for Charlie looking like a little penguin in Killer Apartment. They're genuinely entertaining, often shocking, and have that real amateur creative charm that can be tough to find if they don't have a spotlight shone on them after they're unearthed. Going back to the guys' real lives, the timeline for how the big three of Rob, Glenn and Charlie came together to be friends is a little shaky. With all three of them being wannabe actors in New York and later Los Angeles, all three of them ended up at the same casting auditions more than once, alongside thousands of others gunning for the same parts. Given the world of small-time acting is huge enough to run across a swathe of people and small enough to cross paths more than once, there were coincidences like Glenn and Charlie being under the same casting agency at the start of the millennium. It wasn't until they had a few other chance encounters that they really got to know one another. One of these meetings was when Glenn and Charlie screen tested together for That 80s Show in 2001. At this point, Glenn had only landed a couple of roles, including The Job and some theatre work.
Hey, it's me. Yes, I was just with him. Oh my God, he's impossible.
But in a car ride home together, Glenn actually got a call letting him know that he'd managed to get a lead role in the ultimately ill-fated That 80s Show, which ended up running for only one season. Given they were both under the same agency, Glenn was able to ask if they had any news for Charlie too, to which they asked to put him on the phone.
Driving down Pico, I get a call from my agent, Stephanie Ritz, at the time Endeavor, and you were also with Endeavor. Stephanie calls me, she's like, you got it. You got the part. And I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. Holy shit. I just booked the lead in a half-hour comedy. That's amazing. And I was like, you know what? Actually, Charlie's right next to me. You got any news for him?
Yeah.
And she was like, there was like a little pause, and then she was like, yeah, put Charlie on. And then I just heard, and I handed you the phone, and I heard you like, yeah. Yeah, no, that's cool.
Rob falls into the story, having met Charlie when they sat together on a plane ride, both being flown out to test for a pilot that neither of them landed. Rob had been working on screen for slightly longer than both of his peers, having appeared in films such as The Devil's Own and Wonder Boys as far back as 1997, but struggling more financially, seeing as both of those projects cut his scenes. He did have a couple of roles that made it to the public, including a number of commercials.
Hey, you.
Me?
Yeah. Did you ever try cigarettes?
I was 14.
Any reason?
I guess I was trying to be cool or something.
Really?
Well, yeah.
So you tried it because other people were doing it?
Yeah, I guess.
And why don't you do it anymore?
A lot of reasons. Just didn't like it, you know? I don't need to smoke to, like, fit in. Hold up. We finished?
And also having a spot on Law & Order 4 years before Charlie did.
We found his prints on coins in a payphone on 71st.
And on the bullets that killed the delivery guy.
No, you didn't.
Mr. Timo,
Well, you can't get fingerprints off.
Be quiet.
However, he was growing tired of the constant casting and being turned down for films such as Tuck Everlasting in 2001, for which all three of the gang ended up in the same room together for perhaps the first time. I just found this while editing, but I also want to point out that the same year, by coincidence, Rob and Charlie both appeared in the same film together, Campfire Stories 2001. Especially while he was struggling to make ends meet waiting tables and writing screenplays that went through creative trouble before eventually cutting him out. This in particular was the story of a dramatic screenplay that was picked up by Taxi Driver and Raging Bull writer-turned-director Paul Schrader when Rob was just 21. This experience had even led to Rob and Glenn ending up in a table reading together with the likes of Al Pacino. It's easy to see why this might have made Rob feel like this was his big break into the industry, but what followed was months to years of the script being adjusted, changed in tone, and rewritten to the point of Rob feeling a complete lack of creative ownership of the project. Eventually, the film was dropped when Schrader signed on to another film and Rob was left in the dust, still tending bars and waiting tables. It was at this point in time that he met up for coffee with Charlie Day and first discussed making a project of their own. We finally get back to those Simpson Day short films when these private projects were shared between the new group of friends. Disillusioned with the process of the film industry, Rob and Glenn loved these videos and how they were just made for fun, created for creation's sake.
Rob, I have a distinct memory of you and I. So I used to record those IFC
Oh God.
things. And
Yes.
coming up on IFC, it's Dario Argento's whatever. So being at a place called Buzzy's on Melrose, where I did all the things, and you met me. We had coffee across the street from Buzzy's, and we had a conversation about like we should just make our own fucking thing because we're sitting around waiting for.
But was that after we had been hanging out at your apartment with you and Jimmy Simpson, and you guys showed us all those really super weird in-camera edited movies that you guys made in New York City? You and Jimmy Simpson and Nate Mooney and David Hornsby and
Logan
Marshall Green
Yeah.
made all these super weird, really fucking funny short movies. And I remember sitting there watching those with you, Rob, and both of us were like, oh my God, this shit is so fucking funny.
You know, that it's like it was the 2000 equivalent of TikToks or like
Right.
you know, like YouTube videos. Like there was no YouTube, so we just
It was
pretty
just
much-
for you guys, right?
for
Just to
us,
show
yeah.
your friends.
Yeah, just
But Jimmy did put a couple up on YouTube, and I stand by them. I think they're super funny. I don't know if they're
years
still
later.
there.
Yeah, I think so.
And I remember it being pretty funny. And
Yeah,
I was like, oh, I
it
think
was
we can-
good.
we can do this. But then it's so hard to get anything through to the machine. So you'd send it to somebody and they'd be like, oh, I'll read it. And then 3 weeks later, they'd just forget about it and that'd be the end of it. And so then you know, watching Charlie's Home movies, I
let's
was
just do it.
like, what the fuck? Why are we waiting for somebody else? Let's just make it
Just do it.
ourselves.
These videos were the true seed of Sunny. Rob had the idea, or according to some stories, a fever dream, for a short film about a man going to his friend's place to borrow some sugar, only for the friend to tell him he has cancer. Relieved to have a confidant to talk to for the first time, he begins to open up. Meanwhile, all the other man can think about is how he wants to get out of there as fast as possible with the sugar. Spurred on by the idea, Rob wrote a screenplay for a short film called Charlie Has Cancer that same night, and approached his friends Glenn and Charlie, as well as his girlfriend at the time, Jordan Reed. After an early, scrapped, quote-unquote not good version of the video in which David Hornsby played Rob's role, the story was reshot primarily at Jordan and Glenn's apartments. They were the cleanest. Rob was renting a garage that belonged to other West Hollywood homeowners at the time. As a side note, there may have also been another early version of the pilot script, which had Rob and Charlie playing grown-up, washed-up versions of Haley Joel Osment and Frankie Muniz respectively, though I could only find one source for this, so it could be bullshit. Rob initially wanted to be behind the camera for the sake of ensuring the shoot went smoothly with a very limited crew, as well as feeling that David was funnier than he was, a feeling that Rob struggles with amongst his friends and co-stars to this day, especially at the time given he had only acted dramatically up until this point.
I never considered myself like a super funny performer. I always thought I could write funny stuff. I remember when I gave you that script and I was like, I don't think I could pull this off, but I feel like maybe the two of you could make the scene really funny. And then sure enough, you did. So then my thought was like, well, why not just populate with really funny people that can make this dark material really funny?
But a reshoot starring the gang as we know them instantly clicked so much better.
Hello?
Charlie,
Yeah?
it's Glenn.
Who?
Glenn.
Oh. Oh! Hey, I'll pick you up!
Charlie Has Cancer was different. You can see from the very first frame that this is Sunny. Even so early on, and with a completely different premise of actors struggling to make it in LA. The buzzing silence of that white text on black background tells you everything you need to know about the tone of this show. There's a reason why it worked so well at the time, and why it's still there to this day. It's not presented as a documentary, but it's real. It's gonna be awkward, it's gonna revel in the uncomfortable pauses, the faux pas, and the lack of self-awareness of how real people could act in a terrible conversation. I think it's likely that the tone was honed in on during those first couple of attempts, because Charlie Has Cancer seems so complete, distinct, and fleshed out from the very start.
That scene we shot probably 10 times.
Yeah.
Over the course of like 2 years. We were just experimenting. We were just working it out. You know what I mean? It was like almost like working on a song.
Well, just trying to find ways to make terrible, terrible, terrible characters into funny, relatable people. And so it just took time.
There are certain similarities to the Simpson Day short films from earlier, notably the lack of artificial lighting, instead being lit by a half-blinded window. But it's evolved and matured in other ways. Being a home production, the pilot has a far more shaky handheld style. Despite the obvious limitation, this was also part of the vision for the show, and was, to an extent, carried over to the network series. The creators were inspired by the awkward comedy of Curb Your Enthusiasm and the British run of The Office, and particularly the possibilities of affordable digital cameras coming onto the market at the time. Gone is the ambitious and wacky cinematography, instead being replaced by framing that's much more reserved but thoughtful, absolutely fitting for a short film that chronicles such an uncomfortably serious conversation. Even more noticeable is the acting. It's fantastic.
I have this meeting that I have in like half an hour, and I've been putting it off for like a month, dude. Okay. I should cancel it. I'll cancel it, dude. No?
No, I mean, you know, so I don't.
I really shouldn't cancel it.
And then don't.
Okay. All right. Cool.
It feels real but comedic in a straight-faced way, and the writing, pauses, and delivery are already there in the way that makes Sunny so distinct. The realistic bones are still there. It doesn't feel like sitcom dialogue. It has the flow of real conversation, with sentences trailing off, characters stuttering and talking over themselves.
It started out like this. I wasn't feeling well.
Did you want to talk right now?
I was thinking.
This is tough, Charlie. I actually can't.
Lines that aren't funny or even morbid are made funny by the delivery. Think of Glenn's joyous reaction to the bad news about Charlie's diabetic issue, just because it means he can keep the sugar guilt-free.
I'll get this back to you.
Okay, great. Well, I'm not really gonna need it, so.
Don't say that.
Oh no, I don't know. Also, there's a bit of a diabetic issue now, so.
Oh, so you really won't need it then?
No.
Okay, great.
This is in part because while the scene was scripted, a good amount of improvisation was used to keep things feeling natural, similar to how the network series of Sunny was shot later on. Their performances are much more subtle and real than they were in the earlier short films, and they lean into the uncomfortable cringe humour much more than the loud and absurdist scenes in Charlie's short films. The comedy is found in the fact that these could be real, terrible people walking around the same world you live in, and from the start, it's brilliant. There was a pervasive sense that this short film could become something more. It was fun to shoot, and the story spark naturally expanded into more of a web with characters who had lives beyond the short film. The gang knew that this home movie was funny enough to become a thing, and this thing quickly bloomed into an idea for a show called It's Always Sunny on TV. This title was based on the a-ha song, The Sun Always Shines on TV, which Glenn had been listening to around the time. Shot over the span of 2003 at the aforementioned homes of the actors, this now pilot and a second follow-up episode titled Big Breasted Violence, for which nothing but tiny clips of footage have ever been released, starred the new main cast of Rob McElhenney as Rob, Glenn Howerton as Glenn, Charlie Day as Charlie, and Jordan Reed as Sweet D. While the three men had the same names as the creators of the show, the name Sweet D felt natural alongside her early characterization, in which she was the sweet contrast to the guys' more abrasive personalities. And along with a lot of the names on the show, it came from an interesting real story. When Rob first moved to Los Angeles, he lived with the actor Chris Backus, who later appeared as Bobby in The Gang Goes to the Jersey Shore. One of the people in his friend group was Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine, who was dating his now wife Denise Louisa. She wasn't too pleased when years later she heard Tom's private pet name for her, Sweet D, on national TV. It's worth mentioning that the writers have admitted they often draw inspiration from things and names they've known in their real lives, and that these things aren't pointed jabs at people or theft of private matters, but more just searching what they know for a name that would suit a particular character. This ties into the names of the main three themselves. Even from the earliest drafts of the home videos where David Hornsby played one of the roles, the three characters were still called Rob, Charlie, and Glenn. They even reference projects the actors were really part of, such as Law and Order.
No, I didn't. You lied to me. Pharmaceutical sales, please. I saw you on that episode of Law and Order.
No, don't turn this. Law and Order, you saw that?
Yeah.
Rob. Yeah, really? Did you? Can we go? Please?
You were really good, actually.
You think so?
Yeah.
I thought it was a little over the top.
No, I thought it was...
But even still, the characters were not autobiographical. They were characters divorced of the names they had. Through the year of 2003, the Charlie Has Cancer short film was expanded into a full episode of television. Although there isn't much to go off for the rest of the episode beyond the cancer conversation, I think it's interesting seeing the similarities and differences to what the show later came to be. Some of the character dynamics seem exactly the same, despite the different scenario of them talking about getting auditions and working on films as actors struggling in LA.
The mother part in the mother Michael Bay movie that was promised to me. That's an Academy part.
Some of the character dynamics seem exactly the same, in particular the one between Rob and Glenn. Already living together, their later characters are already developed and shining through, with Rob having a goofy, confident lack of self-awareness, and Dennis having a real sense of pride and caring too much about his image. There's even the early seeds of homosexuality being a theme on the show.
People already assume that we're gay.
The standout bit from these few clips is Glenn talking to Rob about something on his foot, something I really wish had made it into the real series.
What is that? Right there, in that region of the foot. Oh, ew, yeah. I had that on my foot. I had that. Have you been wearing my shoes? No. See, I've been wearing yours. The Pumas, I haven't been wearing socks.
On the other hand, while Charlie again has similar flippant and emotional qualities as the Charlie we know and love from later Sunny, he seems slightly more distant from the other two, perhaps the third friend, the Kramer, as opposed to part of a trio. Note how in the original short film conversation he seems to not even recognize Glenn's voice at first.
Charlie.
Yeah?
It's Glenn.
Who?
Glenn.
Oh. Hey, I'll pick you up.
Another through line that made it into the full series is the waitress already being mentioned as a character that Charlie is obsessed with.
Let me get this straight. You girl that Charlie's had a crush on for over a year? Yeah, but only after he completely blew me off. Okay, so we're gonna do that again. We're gonna just get naked in the house, smell like vagina, and then take a shower.
Although a notable absence is Jordan Reed as Sweet D, an absence that continues into episode 2. While she was on screen as a fourth character, her scenes from these original pilots have never made it to the public eye. Likely because either the network or the creators didn't want her as part of the DVD bonus features a lot of these clips are sourced from. Joining the cast for these two at-home pilots were friends David Hornsby, Jimmy Simpson, Artemis Pebdani, and Mary Elizabeth Ellis as the waitress, as well as Glenn's college friend and ex-partner Lorena Baccarin as Carmen, who appeared in the Big Breasted Violence pilot as a favour to Glenn, and who has starred in a huge number of noteworthy projects such as Firefly and the Deadpool series. From the very few clips we've seen, Big Breasted Violence is very much more of the same as the Charlie Has Cancer pilot. The clips we have of this episode follow the storyline of Rob and Carmen, as well as Artemis auditioning for Glenn and Charlie, both of which were later reworked into the final network version of Season 1's Charlie Has Cancer. Right off the bat, I think there's more to be said here about some of the comedy that's defined all of Sunny's run. From the very first moments we have from this episode, sexism is used as comedy, albeit in a way that is making fun of these characters for speaking the way they do, rather than a sexist joke being the punchline in itself.
The women in this city, shallow, materialistic, and just stupid. And, don't get the cans, get the bottles. Get the imports.
You're laughing at these characters for being terrible people who aren't like you, not because you're relating to the things they say. It's only seconds later that completely transphobic lines are spoken too.
The one by the chair?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a dude.
That's a man.
No, the brown one with the hair. Right, that's a guy.
And I think in this case, the lines are a lot blurrier. As soon as Carmen is brought up, both Glenn and Charlie call her a man, a dude, and start pointing out her anatomy. Much in a way that would have been absolutely commonplace in 2003 when this was shot.
Look at his jeans. There's a bulge in there.
That's a penis.
There's a bulge of a big penis in his jeans.
It's a man rub.
Using bigotry as a tool for comedy is a lot less defensible or palatable when it's the actual prevailing opinion of the time. And given the creators of the show have expressed regrets of how they handled this, I think it's at the very least a very misguided time capsule to a time when even fewer people accepted trans people for who they are, and judged them for who they were. That being said, I think it's worth pointing out that in complete contrast to this, Carmen is portrayed as a completely normal, attractive, and charming person. She as a character is not stereotyped, nor disgraced or embarrassed by who they are.
Is that a penis in your pants?
Yeah.
I find this incredibly interesting, and I'll explore it deeper when I cover season 1 of the show, as the scene is extremely similar in the network version. But in short, despite the misguided way the guys talk about Carmen, it's very interesting to me how there's still nuance in the fact she's presented as a completely lovely person, and it's only in the way she's spoken about by others that's the problem, as is so often the case in the real world. As in the network version of the show, Rob is quickly taken in by Glenn and Charlie's transphobic attitude, and goes over to express it to Carmen, only to be flipped like a switch as soon as he's complimented and charmed by this person he finds attractive.
You lied to me.
No, I didn't. You lied to me. Pharmaceutical sales, please. I saw you on that episode of Law and Order.
No, don't turn this... Law and Order, you saw that?
Yeah.
There's a fun difference in this conversation that gives us a peek into the alternate timeline where it's still sunny on TV and we're following actors in LA. Rather than Rob lying about not going to the gym, he lies about his job, and Carmen says she saw him in an episode of Law and Order, a show Rob McElhenney really appeared in 1997. This is another spot where the ground is leveled between Carmen and the guys, as she flips being accused of lying about her gender back on them. The joke being how quick Rob is to drop the hate when he's being flattered.
Law and Order, you saw that?
Yeah.
Rob. Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Did you... Can we go? Please?
You were really good, actually.
You think so?
Yeah.
I thought it was a little over the top.
No, I thought it was great.
Come on. I gotta go.
Oh.
But, you know what, maybe I'll call you. I'll call you.
His appreciation of Carmen as a person shines through above his friend's transphobia, and although there's no way it was planned at this point, his sexuality is already being brought into question as part of his character. It's also worth noting that the same free sound library music cues are already in use in this pilot clip.
I'll call you.
Bye.
Though I can't confirm if these weren't edited in later on as part of the DVD bonus features. The other clip we have from Big Breasted Violence is a scenario completely foreign to Sonny until season 15's The Gang Makes Lethal Weapon 7, where Glenn and Charlie are hosting an audition for something where they meet Artemis, who enters looking very different from how she appears in Network Sonny with this short black haircut. She plays much the same character as she does in the show, even down to getting up into Dennis's face as she does in the Coyote Ugly performance that got reworked into the season 1 version of Charlie Has Cancer. But it's very fun seeing Charlie and Glenn in a very different role here. I think it's also worth pointing out how similar her speech in the bald cap is to the scene in season 8's Charlie's Mom Has Cancer. It might have been something they kept in their back pocket for a very, very long time. Artemis is another character that shares their actor's real name, though an interesting fact is that in this scene, her full name is revealed to be Artemis Dubois, a surname that's never spoken in the show, but was reiterated in the Nightman Cometh live tour in 2009. So it does seem to be canon.
My name is Artemis Dubois, and yes, and I am the co-director of this production.
You're the assistant director.
I'm the
You're not even
co-director.
close to
I'm the co-director.
Glenn's complete disinterest, almost embarrassment in Artemis's melodrama is much the same as the show, but I find Charlie's absolute enthusiasm for her performance very endearing. There's been a long pervasive myth that the pilots of Sonny was shot for $200. Some say it's as little as $85, but Charlie has since said that it was shot for nothing.
Is it true that you shot the pilot of this for like $200 with some friends?
You know what? We shot it for nothing. We
Really? Because that's more believable than actors having $200.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think
you shot it for nothing, really?
Yeah, they needed like a price. They're like, well, we got to say you did something. So we're like, I don't know where this $200.
The press came up with $200.
Yeah, we weren't like, $198, $199, and
you did not save your receipts.
No, we didn't have any receipts. We were like a bunch of kids with cameras running around shooting each other.
The only costs would have been the tapes for the camcorders it was shot on and the pizza that fed the team. Although we only have a few minutes of footage, by the time the projects were finished, the final cut was 26 minutes long. There may have been up to 32 minutes of edited footage, as seen in a photo of the original DVDs taken to networks that Glenn posted in 2018. It'd be fantastic to see the full cut of these someday. What we do have, though, is sourced from a couple of places. In particular, Charlie and Glenn's cancer conversation, as well as Rob meeting Carmen, were included in the bonus features of the Sonny Season 1 and 2 DVDs, and the rest were posted by Jordan Reed on Instagram in 2020. Once these 2 pilots were shot and edited, there were real hopes that they could be enough to prove their concept to one of the big networks. It's worth noting that at this time, despite the creators having varyingly steady incomes from small-time acting gigs, all 3 of them were really hoping for something big. Exciting breaks had fallen short when just in the year prior, Glenn Howerton had landed the starring role in That 80s Show, a project that was cancelled after just 1 season in 2002. And Charlie Day had co-starred in Louie, a show that was cancelled after just 4 episodes. The rest of the show didn't even make it to air. It's safe to say that, although it was a long shot, hopes must have been quietly high that they could land the dream job of having a show they could write, produce, edit, and act in themselves. But things weren't looking good early on, no thanks to some of these same demands. Rob was able to get into network offices thanks to his manager and agent, and the pitching process involved him just going around and popping in the DVD and seeing if people laughed. It was shopped around time and again over the span of a couple of days to networks including HBO, Comedy Central, VH1, MTV, CBS, and Fox, the last of which were the only ones who didn't laugh once, apart from when they were telling him to get out of the room. While 3 or 4 of the networks did make offers for Sonny, the creative control the team wanted was a huge sticking point for them. The networks had the expectations of making this show the usual way, and the idea of making these 3 nobody creators the executive producers, writers, and actors in their own show was an almost unprecedented level of control for major network television. There was one network willing to take that risk. John Landgraf, the president of FX, was looking to reintroduce comedy back to the channel for the first time since the 2003 series Lucky. At the time, FX were known for dramas such as The Shield and Nip/Tuck, but were wanting to expand their demographic with a new, late-night, other side of comedy block for 2005.
FX presents the other side of comedy.
And they were willing to forge their own identity with fresher and riskier comedy television. That lent itself well to this strange, edgy, loud, and poorly lit show made by a few close friends. And so, they'd done it. They weren't home free yet, and they knew that. They'd been part of big productions before being dropped at the last second one too many times. But a reshot pilot was ordered by FX, and their budget skyrocketed from $0 to a whopping $400,000. They had a professional crew and makeup artists, equipment, and locations. There was one big caveat. While the gang could keep creative control of the show, and the tone and writing could stay the same, FX did want to change the core concept of the story. With the likes of Entourage and The Comeback on the air, they felt there were too many shows centered around actors making ends meet in LA, and they were probably right. Rob was more than happy to make this change, and suggested setting the series in his hometown of Philadelphia, and to make them struggling bar owners instead. After all, it was about the character dynamics. It didn't matter what job they had. It just had to make sense that they'd have plenty of spare time to bum around and get into hijinks. They were given the go-ahead, and the pilot went into production across locations in Los Angeles and Philadelphia. It's at this point that I want to fold Jordan Reed's story into the narrative. Jordan's blog post about her experience developing Sonny was a fantastic source of information for this project. She claims that at this point, the 4 of them, Jordan, Rob, Glenn, and Charlie, met up and talked about what to do, in the very real possibility that the network would want some of them, but not all of them. Screen tests, marketability, and politics could very easily lead to one of the cast being replaced, so an informal all of us or none of us pact was agreed between them. It won't be too long before this becomes relevant again. The script was rewritten at some point in 2004 in preparation for the high-budget FX pilot. Rob is described as devastatingly talented, charming, and handsome, and Glenn is described as 28. Although we only have 1 page of the script from an Instagram post Rob made in 2021, one big departure it takes from both the original home movie and the season 1 adaptation is that both Rob and Glenn meet Charlie at the door for the cancer reveal, rather than just Glenn. It's at some point in between the FX pilot script being written and being shot that our main characters' names had a rethink. Rob became Mac, Glenn became Dennis, and Charlie had a shocking left turn, becoming Charlie. 2 of the 3 men's names are still derived from their own: Charlie Day, Rob McElhenney, but Glenn Howerton is completely divorced from Dennis Reynolds. He knew from the start line that this character had some questionable tendencies, and wanted to distance himself from it as much as possible. The three men were made executive producers, and despite the creative power they had over the show, there were a couple of issues that rubbed up against the network and the on-set crew. In particular, the creators wanted the show to keep the same homemade verite look that they'd fallen in love with in the home videos. While they did manage to retain this to an extent, especially compared to the average TV show in 2004, they went as far as to suggest no marks for the actors, and even no, or very little, lighting on set. This was pushed back against by every director and every network representative.
You know, guns blazing, we were like, this is how we want to shoot the show. And every director, everybody we talked to were like, that's fucking crazy. You can't shoot it that way. That makes no sense. And we were like, well, we can, because we just did. We did with nothing, with no resources.
Yeah,
just
no lights, no marks.
no lights, no marks, just, you know.
On top of this, they wanted to shoot cross coverage with 3 cameras at all times, so that they could get multiple angles of any good take they got. The directors they had shooting the pilots told them this was outright impossible, due to how hard it is to light for 3 cameras at once, not to mention that Rob, Glenn and Charlie were crossing the line and missing eye lines, because they were hardly taking that into consideration when it came to camera placement. This was their first project behind the scenes, after all. The very small amount of footage we have from the FX pilot is where we finally get to see Jordan Reed's performance as Sweet Dee. She plays the character more softly, and perhaps even more naturally, meaning she feels like a real, regular person.
So I figure she's probably a very compassionate person towards sick people.
Okay.
So here's the thing. I'm thinking maybe you could talk to her.
Her portrayal of the character fits the straight man role she was given more snugly than the performance we got in the network series, which evolved smoothly into the zanier and more obnoxious attitude we grew to know Sweet Dee as in the long term. What I'm trying to say is that this is another peek into another timeline, where the show could have been a little different. And while I'm glad Dee grew into the character she did, I think both actors did a fantastic job portraying her as the type of Dee they saw her to be. Right out of the gate, Sweet Dee is talking about both her acting and psychology experience, both facets that ended up in the network show too.
No, he cannot be left alone right now. People who are going through emotional and physical trauma have this natural tendency to push others away. But my theatrical training has taught me that what you have to do with these people is you have to surround them with the support.
Whoa, you know what? Nobody cares about your theatrical training.
A point of contrast here is that there's a clip of Dennis actually being quite nice to Dee, giving her a glass of wine on the couch before asking her the favor of speaking to the waitress, as opposed to him straight up telling her on the job as he does in the season 1 version, where both characters seem a whole lot more cynical. In another scene, Dee seems much less sarcastic and more genuinely appreciative and in awe of Artemis's performance.
That was amazing. You are by far the best actress in class.
She seems both selfless and selfish at once. She sees 2 birds, 1 stone solutions as the way to go, even if it means tearing someone down as she brings someone else up all at once.
Do it.
Okay. But I'm gonna have to train her, so I'm not gonna have time to work on that waitress. You have to choose Charlie's Waitress or Coyote Ugly.
Outside of this, the group dynamics are very much in flow with the way they appear throughout the real network series of Sunny. Especially with the line, "Dee, don't be a pain in the ass."
Me? No, I am not helping you guys with this.
Dee, oh no, come on, don't be a pain in the ass.
A pain in the ass? I work so hard for you guys. Did you know I haven't had a day off in 6 months?
Okay, we're gonna do this again. We're gonna make it about Dee.
The shouting over one another line delivery is fully at play, wherein they choose not to wait for a line to be read before they trade the next ones, as just about all sitcoms, and TV in general, did at the time. Instead, if a character has a thought they want to get out, they're gonna say it.
Guess what? This is great. Charlie lied to us. He doesn't have cancer.
So now you're gonna tell her
Big
that I
surprise.
did
Yeah,
what I do is
daily basis?
What are you talking about?
Building off what I previously said about the grim, all-natural lighting the creators wanted to immerse the show in for this pilot, they certainly achieved it. This version of Paddy's Pub, which is said to be downstairs beneath a warehouse on Delaware Avenue, now Columbus Boulevard, is tight, cramped, sparsely decorated, and overwhelmingly brown. Although the footage we're seeing here has been degraded compared to how it would have looked at the time, as we'll see in a moment, the network series is so beautiful and saturated compared to the sets shown in this pilot. I didn't notice this until I was comparing scenes in making this video, but for how dark and natural Paddy's does look, the colours are so vibrant. There are warm fairy lights behind the bar, green, red and blue mood lighting, not to mention the bright neon signs in the background reflecting on the floor. The Season 1 version of Dennison Mac's apartment is kitted out with fittingly Y2K deep red cupboards and a rich brown couch. Compared, the bar in the FX pilot is sludgy brown and dusty grey. The apartment in Dennison D. Torkin is a muted beige. That being said, some of the visuals shot for the FX pilot were good and consistent enough to make it into the network cut of Season 1 a full year later. On the podcast, Charlie points out the scene where his character reads a book in the waitress's coffee shop as being reused footage from 2004.
That was a coffee shop where we shot the original home movie pilot, which that scene, I think, not the home movie scene, but the when we first got a budget from FX, that scene is in the episode where I have the like red sweater and I'm watching you. It's from Charlie Has Cancer. That's exciting.
I don't. No, what you're saying is there was footage. The original pilot that we shot was Charlie Has Cancer.
Yes.
Was not The Gang Gets Racist, and so there is footage from the original FX pilot that we shot that we then ended up reshooting a bunch of. But there's stuff from the original 2004 one that we shot in Charlie Has Cancer. That's what you're talking
So
about.
that would be the first scene that we shot for the show, not necessarily that one, but
Right.
the first coffee
But it was
shop.
the first one that aired with.
That was the first one that aired.
Which also explains how he can read. Although I haven't seen this mentioned anywhere before, I noticed myself that the scene of Dennis in the car listening to Rick Astley is also cut from the FX pilot, only with the phone call from Sweet D portrayed by Jordan Reed swapped out very closely for the network version.
Hello?
Hey, Dennis. Hey, it's Dee. I was. What are you listening to?
Rick Astley. What's up?
I figured it out.
I just solved all
I know
of
how
our
to bring girls into the bar.
Really?
I want you to hide.
Except for Charlie and the whole cancer thing. But I did figure out how to help a bar.
Sweetie, we talked about this.
No, just listen.
I was
thinking
we could do
one of those Coyote Ugly themes with the girls dancing on the bar and taking off their bras and stuff. I'm telling you, women love this shit.
I'm listening.
My
Okay, well, I have a
friend
who
would be
absolutely perfect for it.
And she'd work for tips only.
Tips only. And she would even come in and interview with you so you could see if you liked her.
Would she wear the hot pants, tank top, want a hump pumps?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Do it.
Okay, but
Only
I'm gonna
under
have
one
to train her,
condition.
so I'm not gonna have time
I
to
don't
work
wanna
on that
help you get
waitress.
that waitress to
You have to
sleep with her.
choose Charlie's waitress or Coyote
Hey,
Ugly.
you know what? You gotta choose Charlie's waitress or a hot new bartender.
Sweet D's out. What?
The two scenes are unbelievably close, even in the pace of editing. As you can see, the fidelity seen in Season 1 must have been very close to what the FX pilot was shot in, and it's a real shame the full quality version of this has never surfaced. The pilot wrapped shooting, and it wasn't long after this that behind the scenes, Jordan Reed ended her relationship with Rob. You might have noticed that earlier I said that the three men had been made executive producers. Jordan was never even part of the conversation. She walked into work one day and Rob, Glenn and Charlie had desks, and she didn't. Their relationship had already been unraveling around the time, and once it seemed like her friends had joined a boys club with FX managers and executives, she thought it best to be quiet and be grateful for the role she had on the show. She was still Sweet D, as much as she feared she was now nothing more than a replaceable girl. Jordan claims that during their breakup conversation following the pilot wrap, Rob told her that if she left him, she'd be off the show. With a contract not yet set in stone, the show still not officially picked up, and her belief he was bluffing, she rolled the dice and left him regardless. A couple of months after the pilot wrapped shooting, Sunny was picked up for a full series to air in 2005. Jordan's agent called her to let her know that Rob, Charlie and Glenn had been picked up. She had not, and she would only receive one episode's salary's worth of payout. Considering she was one of the creators of the show, she contemplated suing FX over wrongful termination and her meager compensation, but quickly gave up on the idea after meeting up with a lawyer. She'd be in for a very long and very expensive legal battle against 3 huge corporations, her ex-boyfriend, and at the end of it she'd be laughed out of the industry as the girl who tried to sue FX. Jordan is insistent that she has no ill will towards the actress who replaced her, but the situation did lead to anger and mental health struggles for her. Glenn and Charlie never spoke to her again, her agent dropped her, and she fell out of the industry. 2 decades on from this story, Jordan has found a lot of happiness and has since become an author of multiple published books. My personal reading of this situation is that the boys' club nature of FX was a terrible environment for young women like Jordan, and that cultural sexism is a reasonable explanation as to why she was never even in the boardroom conversations to begin with. She wasn't given the opportunity to make her case, or given the feeling that she was allowed to make any noise. Regardless of how the situation played out, she should have been given a far bigger payout for being one of the voices who shaped the show, and especially as one who was let go without a real cause. On the other hand, from Rob's perspective, I can see how deeply uncomfortable it would be to co-star with your very recent ex-girlfriend in the biggest opportunity of your lifetime, an opportunity you developed and wrote. It might have created a tense and toxic working environment that could have shortened the lifetime of the show, not to mention affected the on-screen dynamics that the viewers saw. Would we ever have gotten a Sweet D as funny and zany as we did with Jordan Reed in the role? It's impossible to know. With the show picked up for a full season by late 2004, Rob McElhenney, Glenn Howerton, and Charlie Day had a huge task ahead of them. 3 men who had hardly written anything in their lives now had 7 episodes of television to write in a very short time frame, a world to establish and a main character to recast, all before the summer of 2005. We'll just have to see if it turns out any good. Who knows? It might.